Today, we're looking at one of the most remarkable figures to ever shape the globe. But before we get into all the dates and the drama, I want you to just imagine a light, not some blinding flash, but a quiet, steady light. The kind that never goes out, right? One that shines through freezing cold winters, through agonizingly difficult years, profound sadness, and eras of just massive global change. That light is actually the perfect metaphor for the life of Queen Victoria. Today, we're going to follow that light. We're going to discover the journey of a young woman who found this quiet, extraordinary strength to become, literally, one of the most powerful people in all of human history. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this because it really is a central mystery. How does a shy, isolated 18-year-old girl end up ruling half the world? Picture this. It's the year 1819. We're in London, England. At this point in time, England is already this incredibly powerful nation. They've got great kings, massive armies, immense ships sailing all over the globe. But the focal point of our story? It doesn't start on some grand battlefield. It starts inside a really quiet room in a huge house called Kensington Palace. A tiny baby girl named Alexandrina Victoria is born. Her dad is Prince Edward and her mom is Princess Victoria. She's small, she's quiet, and she has absolutely no idea that one day she's going to rule for an astonishing 63 years. That's longer than almost any monarch before her. So how does a tiny, fatherless baby born on a cold spring morning grow up to command that kind of power? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the environment that forged her. Which brings us to Section 1, the strict Kensington System, a childhood under watchful eyes. You see, life was not kind to Victoria early on. When she was just 8 months old, her father became gravely ill and passed away. And this left her young mother completely alone in this massive, cold palace with a tiny baby. They were incredibly vulnerable and isolated. So to cope with their precarious position, her mother, along with an advisor named Sir John Conroy, implemented what is now famously known as the Kensington System. Let me tell you, this was a system of absolute control. Victoria didn't go to school with other kids. She was never allowed to just go play freely outside. No friends coming over. Literally every single moment of her day was monitored. They wouldn't even let her speak to other people alone. It was a suffocatingly strict, deeply lonely, and frankly oppressive childhood. The whole thing was perfectly designed to keep her entirely dependent on her mother and Conroy. But, here is where we first see that quiet, steady inner light really start to burn. Because she couldn't escape physically, she escaped mentally. Victoria was exceptionally clever. She threw herself into her own quiet escapes. She actually mastered French, German, and Italian. She read endlessly, drew these beautiful pictures, and crucially, she wrote in her diary every single day. In those pages, she documented her profound desire to just be free and make her own choices. And as for companionship, her only true, loyal friend was a small spaniel dog named Dash. Dash didn't judge her. Dash didn't try to control her. He simply stayed by her side. And in a deeply lonely life, honestly, that was enough to keep her spirit alive. Moving right along to Section 2, A Teenager Takes Power, the morning of June 20, 1837. So the old king, William IV, had been growing weaker for a while, and Victoria happened to be his closest living relative. Very early that morning, while the 18-year-old was still fast asleep, there was a sudden knock at her door. 2 men arrived, bowed their heads, and delivered the incredibly heavy news. The king was dead. Now, her immediate reaction was nothing short of extraordinary. She didn't panic. She didn't break down crying. She sat tall. She sat still, and she uttered just 4 words. I will be good. 4 incredibly small, quiet, but unshakably strong words. They perfectly capture her character, don't they? In a single moment, this isolated teenager accepted the massive weight of history and shifted instantly into the mindset of a leader. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly who she had become. Later that very same day, she held her first meeting with her royal advisors. Now keep in mind, we're talking about older, highly experienced, very serious men. They walked into that room fully expecting a nervous, trembling young girl that they could easily manipulate and control, kind of like Conroy had tried to do her whole life. Instead, the reality completely shocks them. Victoria took her seat right at the head of the table. She spoke with total clarity, listened with intense focus, and made decisions with absolute confidence. They were stunned. And just like that, the Kensington System was instantly over. She immediately moved out of Kensington straight into Buckingham Palace, started making her own schedule, and tasted true freedom for the very first time in her life.
This leads us into Section 3, Love and Devastating Loss. Finding and losing Prince Albert. Being a young queen and bearing the incredible weight of an entire nation, well, wisdom and good advisors aren't quite enough. She deeply needed a true partner, someone to share the unique burden of the crown. Enter her cousin, Prince Albert, who came to visit in 1839. Unlike the loud, boisterous men of the royal court, Albert was tall, quiet, and deeply thoughtful. He loved music, science, art. And Victoria? She instantly recognized a kindred spirit. Her diaries from that time literally glow with happiness. She wrote about his intelligent eyes and how wonderfully free she felt near him. But here's a fun fact. Because she was the queen, royal protocol dictated that she couldn't wait around to be asked. She had to do the asking. So Victoria proposed. They married on February 10, 1840, and Victoria chose to wear a white dress, a highly unusual move at the time that actually sparked a global trend we still see today. They became the ultimate team. He was her absolute best friend, her greatest support, and together they had 9 children, finding this really deep, profound happiness.
But happiness doesn't stay forever, does it? 42. In December of 1861, Prince Albert became very ill. He wasn't old, he wasn't weak, but day by day he grew sicker, while Victoria just sat helplessly by his side, holding his hand. On December 14th, at just 42 years old, Prince Albert died.
So, the crucial point is how utterly and completely this shattered her world. Without him, everything just went dark. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she could barely speak. Her mourning was incredibly intense. She wore exclusively black clothing for years. She displayed his photograph in every single corner of the palace. She literally slept with a cast of his hand right beside her in bed, and she even ordered his fresh clothes to be laid out every single morning, exactly as if he were still alive. People started calling her the Widow of Windsor, and many genuinely worried that their queen was permanently lost inside her own grief.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Grand Victorian Era, the courage to continue.
You know, time is patient, and the queen still had a massive country to lead. So slowly, steadily, she began to step back into the light. She never forgot Albert, not for a second, but she learned to carry his memory gently. And her greatest act of courage, it wasn't wielding her massive global power. It wasn't wearing her heavy crown. Her greatest actual achievement was simply continuing, moving forward, step by step, day by day, despite her overwhelming heartbreak.
And it was this quiet courage that built an absolutely monumental legacy over a 63-year reign. Think about it. Starting as a lonely teenager in 1837, she guided humanity through a staggering explosion of progress during what we literally now call the Victorian era. We're talking the invention of the train, the telephone, the very first electric lights. Her empire expanded massively across the globe, eventually leading to her being crowned Empress of India in 1876. By the time she passed away in 1901 at the age of 81, she was so globally connected and universally respected that the entire world literally stopped to remember the woman they all knew as the Grandmother of Europe.
And finally, Section 5, a legacy of courage, the light that never goes out.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the totality of her legacy. She was small in stature, for sure, but an absolute giant in human history. Looking back at her journey maps out this perfect blueprint for human resilience. The lonely, controlled child built a quiet, steady inner strength. The confident adult ruled an expanding empire right alongside her ultimate soulmate. And the grieving widow defined an entire era just by continuing forward. The source material beautifully ties her history to our own modern journeys. Every single time we face a hardship and choose to learn, choose to keep moving, we are channeling that exact same quiet courage.
Which leaves us with this final, really powerful question. Queen Victoria's life proves that sadness, loss, and immense change will inevitably come to all of us. But if we can keep our own inner light burning, even if it's burning quietly, even if we feel like we're moving slowly, we can do something great. So I ask you, when facing your own inevitable moments of loss and change, how will you find the quiet courage to simply continue? Think about that as you go through your week. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep that light burning.